that texting has become a prevalent form of communication for a person under 50. The second one is that technological communication skills damage traditional forms of communication. And his last one is that texting makes people less accountable. And so on to his first claim that it has become the prevalent form of communications for people under 50, I'd like to state that this is not an argument and does not prove that texting has any negative effects. It just simply states that it's become more popular, providing us with an irrelevant thesis. I've also looked into the primary source of his evidence, and in the conclusion it states that the millennials today are a generation that is highly in touch with their friends and relatives, that these forms of communication could be a positive way for more physically isolated Americans to stay in touch with others. So we can see that his own evidence claims that texting helps Americans stay in touch with others, conflicting with his main claim. His second piece of evidence reveals the numbers of voice calls decreasing and the numbers of texting increasing, but again, this does not support how it's negatively affecting communication. He also has evidence that brings up sentiments that talks about how millennials' work habits in the office and how they are negatively affecting productivity, but on the contrary, if you read all of it, it also states that employees just want to know what to do, and they default to whichever communication method will help them complete it as efficiently as possible. I have also found that respondents to the 2012 Pew Research study also reported that mobile technology has made it easier to schedule daily activities and be more productive. So you can see that the use of these mobile devices allow for productivity and efficiency. Now on to subpoint A, which states that texting creates a generation of people that rely on texting to communicate instead of face-to-face, which leads to miscommunication, also has a conflict in his evidence because the following sentence states that to eliminate these misunderstandings, messaging apps like Viber and Line have been experimented with virtually based texting that's impossible to misinterpret. So this solves the problem of miscommunication, and it brings down my opponent's point, as I would like to present another point that states from the 2014 article by TechRadar, arguing that real-time video communication have made it possible to expand the potential for meaningful face-to-face interactions. Mobile technology can deepen the complexity and quality of communication. On to subpoint B, texting puts people in the habit of using acronyms, and he uses a quote from Terry Wood, a teacher at St. Mary's High School, saying that he's seen a decline in writing abilities due to Facebook, tweeting, and texting. But not only is this just a single account from one teacher, we can also see that this could be a hasty generalization that it affects all students this way. I'd also like to state that these statements are inconclusive and that they have sentiments of a theory of false cause, because these decline of writing skills could be due to inadequate teaching or poor education. I'd also like to attack this point by revealing that it actually helps in schools. According to a British study published in the Journal of Computer-Assisted Learning, found a positive correlation between texting and literacy, concluding that texting was actually driving the development of phonological awareness and reading and skills in children. Another study from the Australian Journal of Educational Development and Psychology showed that texting improves spelling because it increases these phonological skills. To abbreviate messages, you have to understand how sounds and letters work or how words are put together. And so texting encourages students to think about these relationships, helping them to understand how words are built. So we can see that texting and the use of acronyms actually enhances learning. On to the second claim, that technological communication skills will damage the traditional forms of communication. We see a couple problems in this claim. The first one being an ambiguity of what really damage to traditional forms of communication are. He uses dysphemism with the word damage, saying that it damages tradition and that texting is injurious, but quite the contrary. Yes, texting has changed communication, whereas communication was limited to postal codes and having to communicate across geographic distances, and mobile devices have removed those barriers. And just because it's traditional and it appeals to authority does not mean that texting is adverse or any less than talking face-to-face. His second subpoint A states that texting has become a necessity for the youth, leading to distraction in schools and failing grades. On the contrary, we can see academic productivity showed by Dr. Claire Wood of Coventry University, who conducted the research for British National Academy for Humanities and Social Sciences, and she states that we were surprised to learn that textism use was actually driving the development of phonological awareness and reading in children. That texting provides a regular form of engagement with written English for children, meaning they can practice spelling and reading on a daily basis. She also states that children use textism is far from problematic. If we see a decline in literacy standards among children, it is in spite of texting and not because of it. Now on to the last claim, that texting makes people less accountable. He brings up a subpoint that states that it is easier to break up or let people down, but he fails to remember that these are events of the human nature that we cannot avoid. We break up with people, we let people down, and if texting makes that easier, then it just makes our lives more comfortable. But then again, the evidence does not reveal anything, and his evidence was that 83% of people would consider ending relationships via text, and it does not reveal anything bad about texting, it just reveals that 83% of people would preferably do it that way. And I'd also like to add that texting improves relationships. According to the February 2014 Pew Research, also found that 41% of 18 to 25-year-olds reported feeling closer to their partner or spouse due to the ability of supplemental communication through the internet or text messaging. So you can see that feeling closer is a good result of communication, which has helped facilitate through texting. His subpoint B, texting takes an emotional aspect away, and he brings up evidence of researchers that say that it undermines the ability to empathize, but this statement is inconclusive and it lacks data and explanation and is simply not true. We can see that a new study uses texting as a way to promote empathy. According to Sarah Conrath, director of the Interdisciplinary Program for Empathy and Altruism Research at Indiana University, she is conducting research into ways that SMS tools can increase empathy for the youth, and she's also collaborated with the John Templeton Foundation, and they send participants recurring text messages that reinforce more empathic behavior. The messages prompt people to imagine others' feelings and experiences and do small kind acts every day. And while my opponent's research has linked mobile devices to negatively affecting communication skills, there is no current consensus regarding how our generation will change for the worse as texting is more incorporated into our society. And while his case suggests that mobile devices can have detrimental effects, my evidence reveals that mobile technology in the age of constant and instant connectivity enriches our lives. Thus, his case falls. Thank you.
All right, you ID'd the claim. You've got a solid layout of what the secondary points are. You dispute the relevance of the first point, but then you kind of go along and make an argument about it anyway. You've got a counterclaim on that particular point, which seems to be a little bit contradictory on the position that you're taking. I thought you were a little bit better on the other arguments where you have very direct evidence and counterclaims on those particular points. You usually also make reference to the absence of evidence that the advocate's using or some problem with the reasoning that they've got. For example, the lack of proof on the problems with acronyms. I thought you pointed out that it's a simple, you've got a singular example that might be unique. It's hard to make a generalization from this particular case. I did think that you made a claim that there could be other causes. That's a good press, but there's no evidence on it. And there are a whole bunch of arguments in there that sort of fit in that category. They're good presses. I think you're better off sticking to the ones where you have the evidence. And you've got a lot of evidence on these points. I thought that you did an excellent job on that. There was a little bit of repetition on the one point when you're talking about the texting and especially like the acronyms I was just talking about. You've got a good piece of evidence that talks about how it's, phonologically, I actually said it correctly. I'm surprised at that, and I didn't even learn it from texting. Phonologically, they learn better because the kids are having to text and they have to figure out what the words sound like and be able to write them out. And then you come back to basically the same argument on a later point, saying the same kind of thing. On the second point, though, I don't think it necessarily demonstrates the point of distraction that the advocate was talking about on that point. That was the one place where I thought your argument wasn't relevant. Everything else seemed to be very relevant, and like I said, I thought you had a lot of evidence on the points. Sometimes you're rushing through the points, and that's because you've got so many things to say. You actually go almost 7 minutes, and that's, of course, 2 minutes overtime, so that's a problem. I think you need to edit a little bit, pick and choose some points, not repeat the one thing, but there's a lot of information here, and you present it, and you explain it really well when you were talking about it. So, my criticism mostly has to do with, maybe a little bit of editing, and be careful about repeating some points. All right, thank you.